She was pale blue, and her scales were traced with silver. She carried a little girl across Westeros and then waited almost 50 years in the dark for another little girl to come. When the second one died, the dragon roared loud enough to crack the chains on her own legs, and when the mob came for her with torches, she was the only dragon in the pit who broke free. Welcome to Westeros Within, where we journey into forgotten ages, hidden legends, and ancient mysteries. This is Dragons of Westeros, Episode 5, Dreamfyre, the dragon who loved two queens. She was hatched in the pits of Dragonstone in the gentle reign of King Aenys, the first son of the Conqueror. The old tales tell us nothing of who tended her egg or the hour she cracked the shell. What the histories give us is the day she was chosen. In the year 32 after the conquest, a 9-year-old princess walked into the dragon yards and was presented with a hatchling the colour of morning frost on water. Her name was Rhaena Targaryen, the eldest grandchild of Aegon the Conqueror, daughter of Aenys I. The chroniclers say the two of them bonded in that instant, as though they had known one another long before the girl was ever born. She named her Dreamfyre. By 12, Rhaena was mounting her. By 15, she was flying her over the whole of Westeros. In those first bright years, Dreamfyre was no war dragon. She was a set of wings. The chronicles recall her silver markings flashing over Harrenhal and the sea cliffs of Tarth, over Runestone and Gulltown, while the girl on her back used her dragon the way almost no Targaryen ever dared, not as a weapon, not as a crown, as a freedom. Then the reign turned dark. King Aenys died young, and his brother Maegor seized the throne. They would call him Maegor the Cruel, and the bright sky above Rhaena's life closed like a shutter. Her first husband, Prince Aegon the Uncrowned, rode against Maegor on the pale dragon Quicksilver and was torn from the sky above the God's Eye, leaving Rhaena a young widow with 2 little daughters to hide. She smuggled her girls across the sea to Fair Isle on Dreamfyre's back in the dead of night. And when Maegor could not have her children, he came for her instead. In the year 47 after the conquest, he forced Rhaena to be his wife. They called her a Black Bride, one of 3 women Maegor widowed and then wed for the proof of their wombs. She lived beneath his roof for months, the girl who had once flown free above Gulltown, now sleeping in the bed of the man who had murdered her brother. And her dragon was kept chained in the dark beneath the dome of the King's Landing Pit, a mile from the Red Keep. She did not stay chained. When Rhaena learned her younger brother Jaehaerys was raising a banner against Maegor, she rose in the night, took the Valyrian steel sword Blackfyre from where the cruel king had left it sheathed beside his own bed, and fled. She climbed onto her dragon in the pit, and Dreamfyre carried the Black Bride and the sword of the Conqueror out of King's Landing and into the sky, flying for Dragonstone, flying to the brother who would become the old king. It is one of the bravest nights in all the chronicles of that century, and it was a dragon with silver markings and morning blue scales who lifted the rider into the dark. Maegor died not long after. Jaehaerys was crowned, and Rhaena, half a queen and half a ghost, should have known peace at last. She did not. She took a second husband, a handsome, feckless man named Andro Farman, and settled at the melted ruin of Harrenhal. There, she drew around her a small court of women she loved, and her husband, eaten by jealousy he could not name, began to poison them. One by one, with the slow tears of Lys, he killed the women Rhaena loved most. When the truth came out, he fled to the top of the chamber of the painted table and fell, or leapt, to the stones below. Rhaena had his body hacked apart and fed to Dreamfyre, and she lost more than a husband. Her eldest daughter, Arya, ran away from court, claimed the old and slumbering Black Dread, and vanished east on Balerion for nearly 2 years. Rhaena mounted Dreamfyre, and together they searched the whole of the world for her lost child. The chroniclers say a pale blue she-dragon was seen over the Barrowlands of the North, the Fever River, the Red Mountains of Dawn, the Fingers, the Mountains of the Moon, the forests of Cape Wrath, and the Arbor. Wherever the sky darkened over Westeros in those years, men looked up and saw a shadow with silver on its wings, and they knew it was a grieving woman looking for her daughter. Arya came home on Balerion at last, already dying, her body ruined by something she had found in the ruins of old Valyria. She died the same day. Rhaena took her daughter's ashes up on Dreamfyre and scattered them into the wind, because the child had always wanted, more than anything else, to fly. After that, Rhaena grew quiet. She ruled Harrenhal as its lady, and in the year 73 after the conquest, she died there at the age of 50. Her ashes were laid inside the melted walls, and her dragon, who had carried her for 41 years, who had been her girlhood and her escape and her vengeance and her grief, was left alone in the world. She would live another 57 years. She went back to the pit of King's Landing, and for nearly half a century she did not take a rider. The old tales say she laid eggs in the dark of the dome. She watched the old king live out his 55 years of peace. She watched the Black Dread grow too tired to rise, and then stop rising at all. And still, above her stone ceiling, the world turned, and Targaryens were born and grew, and none of them ever came to her. Until a strange little girl did. Her name was Helaena. She was the only daughter of King Viserys I and his second queen, Alicent Hightower. The chroniclers tell us she was not like her brothers. Where they were hungry, she was quiet. Where they were loud, she was gentle. She loved moths and butterflies, which she caught and named and spoke to as though they could answer. She spoke in scraps of verse that sometimes came true. Some at court whispered she had the old dragon dreams that had run through the blood since Daenerys herself. Around the year 120 after the conquest, that sweet sad child walked into the Dragonpit of King's Landing and looked up at a pale blue she-dragon who had once carried the Conqueror's granddaughter through the dark above the narrow sea. The dragon woke for her. Helaena was wed to her elder brother Aegon, who would become Aegon II. She bore him twins, Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, and a younger son, Maegor. She was never a war queen. She spent her days with her children and her insects and her quiet verses. And when her father Viserys died and the dance of the dragons broke over the realm, Helaena was pulled into a crown she had never wanted. Then came the men called Blood and Cheese. They were hired by Prince Daemon Targaryen in revenge for the death of a boy called Lucerys. A butcher and a rat catcher crept into the Red Keep on a summer's night and found the queen in her chambers with her 3 little children. They made her choose which of her sons would die. She offered herself. They laughed. At last, weeping, Helaena spoke a name. She named Maegor, her youngest, the baby. And the butcher smiled and cut the throat of the other boy instead. From that night, the Dreamer Queen was gone. She stopped eating. She stopped speaking in whole sentences. She was moved into the inner rooms of Maegor's Holdfast, surrounded by the dry moat full of iron spikes. And there, when the news came that her baby Maegor had also died, torn apart by a mob at Bitterbridge, the Queen of the 7 Kingdoms walked to a high window of the Holdfast and stepped out of it. She fell onto the spikes below and died instantly. And across the city, in the dark beneath the dome of the Dragonpit, Dreamfyre rose with a roar that shook the stones of the hill. The keepers heard her, the streets heard her, the Septons of the Great Sept heard her. 2 of the great chains on her legs snapped clean in the sound. Septon Eustace called it the cry of a mother for a mother. No one had told her. She knew. She had 2 days. The city had gone mad by then. Food was gone. Plague was in the streets. A one-handed preacher in Cobbler's Square called himself the Shepherd and told the crowds every day that dragons were demons, born of godless Valyria, and that the only way to save the realm was to kill them. His crowds grew, And 2 nights after the queen fell from her window, he led them up the hill and into the pit. 5 dragons were chained in that dome. The yellow queen Syrax, abandoned by her rider. The young and grieving Tyraxes and Morgul and Shrykos, half-grown and half-dreaming. And the old one, the pale blue she-dragon of 2 dead queens. Shrykos died to an axe, Morgul to a spear in the eye. Tyraxes burned dozens of men, then was tangled in his own chains and killed. Syrax came down low among the torches, as if searching for a rider's voice, and died on the floor of the pit. And Dreamfyre alone broke her remaining chains. She snapped the iron that had held her through 50 years of pit and peace. She rose into the vast dome of the Dragonpit, the largest roof in the 7 kingdoms, and she dived. She swept low across the floor, pale blue and silver in the torchlight, and burned the mob in long sweeping arcs, and her fire killed more men than all 3 of her sisters combined. The chronicles are clear on this. In her final hour, she killed more of the mob than Shrykos and Morgul and Tyraxes together. 1 man, 1 crossbow, 1 lucky bolt. The quarrel took her in the eye. Half-blind, maddened by the pain, she lost the shape of the dome. She climbed too hard. Her head struck the ceiling of the great stone cavern, and the dome cracked upon the blow. Half of it came crashing down, broken stone, and the weight of the roof she had lived beneath for half a century fell upon her and upon the men she was still killing, and she fell with it. When the survivors crawled free and looked up, the sky above the pit was open to the heavens for the first time in 50 years. Ash was rising from the broken stone, and the only dragon in the city who had loved 2 Targaryen queens was gone. She was 99 years old. She had carried the granddaughter of the Conqueror. She had flown over the fingers and the arbor searching for a lost child. She had slept through half a century of silence, and then woken for a gentle girl who loved moths. And when the world came to drag her into the dark, she broke her chains and took her last flight inside the dome of the pit. She died flying. So tell me this, when Helaena fell from Maegor's Holdfast and Dreamfyre rose in the dark across the city with a roar that snapped her chains, do you believe the dragon knew? Write it in the comments. And if you want more stories from the dragons of Westeros, the great wings that rose before our history and the great wings that fell after, subscribe to Westeros Within and join me for the next chapter. Because next time, we follow the bronze dragon of the Old King, the dragon who carried Jaehaerys the Conciliator through 55 years of peace, the dragon who slept alone on the Dragonmont for a generation after his king died, refusing every voice that came calling, and the dragon who rose again at last for a blacksmith's bastard who would betray the queen he flew for. His name was Vermithor, and when the Bronze Fury opened his wings above the fields of the Reach, the old king's peace ended for good.